One of the best things about One Piece is its immense cast of characters, each of them specially designed and thematically distinct. And what's more, as a shonen manga that fits within the battle manga genre, although it is arguably more than that, there are loads of unique fighting styles prescribed to our various characters, from hand-to-hand combatants like the Fishman martial arts, Rokushiki, to ungodly devil fruit powers and haki users. Oda has crafted a diverse world full of colorful combat styles. But within this incredibly creative world, there is a strange scarcity that I don't think gets talked about often. The fact that there is a very small number of actual clear swordsmen. Okay, before we dive deeper into the topic, let me preface a few things. I'm often accused of being a One Piece glazer, someone who will eagerly eat up whatever Oda decides to cook, no questions asked. And to be fair, that's kinda accurate. I love this series deeply. It is easily my favorite piece of media, not just my favorite manga or anime, just all entertainment or media full stop. But that's also exactly why I want to make this video. I think I have identified something that could perhaps enhance my enjoyment of the series even more than I already do. And maybe this will turn into a series, maybe it won't. We'll see how it goes. But in the event we do make it a series, to make sure you don't miss out on any One Piece discussions, please subscribe to the channel. I promise we have a lot of fun here, and the JoyFleet is so close to getting to 100,000 subscribers, and we'd love to have you on board. Okay, so make no mistake, I love One Piece. I really do. In fact, it's often hard for me to criticize it because almost always Oda has a way of tying everything together, often in ways that only make sense if you're willing to wait and trust the process. But even with that patience, even with all the emotional highs and the storytelling brilliance, there are still some aspects that leave me wanting more. Not because the story is bad, but because you can see the potential for more. And as someone who loves emotionally rich storytelling, I can't help but feel that this is one area that can be explored deeper, both narratively and emotionally. So with that out of the way, let's begin. There's a lack of swordsmen in One Piece. In theory, swordsmen should be a staple in the world of One Piece. After all, the series is premised on the pirate fantasy, which as a genre or theme typically leans heavily into swashbuckling adventure tropes, i.e. a genre that features swordsmanship. And yet, when we examine the main and supporting characters, truly dedicated swordsmen are shockingly rare. Of course, we have Zoro, the undisputed swordsman of the series, with his unusual but iconic three-sword style and relentless pursuit of strength, as well as Mihawk, who is currently the world's strongest swordsman, the one Zoro aims to beat. But who else do we have? Who else fights with swords and sword alone? Take Trafalgar Law for example. Law uses a sword, yes, but his fighting style primarily revolves around his devil fruit powers, not traditional swordsmanship. Even characters like Shanks, whom we do associate with swordsplay, and someone we even know to have once been Mihawk's rival, he isn't strictly defined as a swordsman in the series. In fact, his haki, particularly his Conqueror's haki, is portrayed as his defining combat trait, not his blade. And perhaps that's a shift in his combat style only since he lost his arm in the very first chapter of the series, but regardless, you wouldn't now call Shanks a definitive swordsman, because I don't think it's enough that swordsman in this universe includes anyone who uses or wields a sword. They need to pursue swordsmanship as their main fighting discipline. True swordsmanship is a serious discipline, even a way of life. One of the more common misconceptions in One Piece, or maybe just among the fan base, may be equating anyone who wields a sword as a swordsman. But as the series itself has subtly or not so subtly pointed out, not everyone with a blade is a practitioner of swordsmanship in the true sense. After all, according to King himself, one of Zoro's most recent formidable opponents, who did indeed include sword fighting in his overall combat arsenal, King said himself, just because he uses a sword doesn't mean he is a swordsman. So it seems to be a recognized concept within the One Piece world that swordsmen aren't just anyone who uses a sword as part of their combat repertoire. There seems to be somewhat established codes and standards that one should follow or strive to embody, though exactly what those rules or standards are hasn't been established. There seems to be a culture around the idea of being a swordsman, but it's not yet clear what that fully entails. But from what we've seen, we do know that there must be skill and technique. It seems to have something to do with honor and courage, living, fighting, and dying by the sword, rather than just employing cheap tricks to save your skin, using a sword as only a shortcut or crutch. But this lack of clarity is exactly what I'm talking about. It dilutes what should be a more established archetype in the One Piece world. Because when you apply this stricter definition, the actual pool of swordsmen is remarkably small, and this distinction is crucial when analyzing Zoro's journey and the thematic integrity of his fights. Because for me, the lack of true swordsmen poses a problem when it comes to the storytelling. It's not just a minor world-building issue, it has real narrative consequence, such as when it comes to power scaling, but more importantly, character development, rivalry development, and to be more specific, Zoro's rivalry with Mihawk. As we all know, Zoro's quest is to become the world's strongest swordsman to usurp the current title holder, Mihawk. This is at the core of his character arc, and we've witnessed his journey thus far to achieve his dream, whereby Zoro has fought many combatants, many of whom use swords, but most of them aren't what you would call strict swordsmen. Many of Zoro's opponents wield the sword, but only as one part of their broader combat arsenal. They aren't devoted to the art of the sword, the life of the sword, in the same way that Zoro is. So these battles don't or can't carry the same narrative weight as being a true swordsman's duel. Like I said, King never said that he's a swordsman. Kaku, while trained in swordsmanship to an extent, he's primarily a Rokushiki user with devil fruit powers. Killer, who is certainly ferocious and skilled, he uses bladed weapons more like scythes in unorthodox ways, and not traditional swordsplay. Even Pika is more of a brute with a massive weapon than a refined master of the sword, which the latter seems to be a key trait in swordsmanship. And we could go on and on. Now, don't get me wrong, these opponents all have tested Zoro's strength and they have improved him as a combatant for sure, but they just don't test his true swordsmanship in the true sense of that word. Of the long list of Zoro's opponents, only Ryuma and Hyozo are explicit swordsmen, and even then, Hyozo's significance in the story was only minor, whereas in the case of Ryuma, that was a badass battle for sure that definitely progressed Zoro as a swordsman and also added more to his character by seeding the eventual lore reveal of his heritage, connecting him to Wano via Shusui, but those moments are clearly few and far between. What this means is that Zoro's current journey is being shaped by fights that mostly don't explicitly test his swordsmanship. They don't truly challenge or reflect the essence of his goal, to surpass the world's greatest swordsman. And if his opponents aren't even pursuing that same ideal, then how much of these battles are really pushing him in that specific direction? And look, I do understand that One Piece fights in general don't typically feature combats that pit the same style of fighters against each other. At the end of the day, and like I said earlier, One Piece is much more than just a battle manga, and power scaling really isn't the focus. But when it comes to Zoro, at least, with someone who has such a specific goal to be the world's strongest swordsman, the best swordsman, not just the strongest overall, I do think that this is a missed opportunity. I mean, none of us are expecting Zoro and Mihawk's inevitable showdown to be just a battle of haki or who's stronger overall. We're expecting a swordsman's duel. I don't know about you, but I very much expect to see and want their battle to mirror their initial encounter at Baratier, a battle of pure swordsmanship. And I'm sure as the series has progressed, that's probably not what we're going to get, or rather, it's clear that being a strong swordsman requires more than just finesse in swordsplay, and that elements like haki and strength are indeed very important. I mean, especially what we know of the Meito grading system. Black blades are specifically swords that have been turned black via armament haki. Zoro's Enma draws out his Conqueror's haki to maximize his strength. But even with those additions, the essence of swordsmanship, true swordsmanship, shouldn't be lost. Whereas right now, there's just not enough characters to round out what that true swordsmanship actually looks like. There are no rival swordsman that can imbue upon Zoro new lessons or new understandings as to what it means to be a swordsman. I'd love to see someone challenging his idea of what it means to be a swordsman. Have him question his understanding, his very purpose. It would make his character and his character arc so much richer. I just think the series would be even better than it already is if Zoro was given opponents who are skilled in the same discipline, which is common in most shonen series. Goku had Vegeta, Naruto had Sasuke, and even Luffy has a myriad of rivals, each of whom reflect important aspects of his overall journey. But Zoro, despite being the Straw Hat's first crewmate, his closest rivalry is more of a brotherly one with Sanji, and he lacks a true swordsman rival. We have such wasted potential and opportunity in Tashigi, where her physical appearance and her love for swords made her the prime candidate to serve as this sort of rival figure to Zoro, but that obviously hasn't been the case, and I just think this is a glaring narrative hole, especially when you consider that Zoro's entire character arc is based on surpassing Draco Mihawk, because rivalries don't just provide external conflict, they help define a character internally. And while Zoro is one of the most popular characters in the entire series, and you could make a whole spin-off just dedicated to his overall hype alone, without a contemporary, without a swordsman rival, Zoro's emotional arc does risk being too stoic, too flat. His battles become less about emotional stakes and just solely displays of strength, and that ultimately limits how emotionally deep his story can be. I love Zoro and his moments as a character, but I can't help but feel that this absence of a clear rivalry does weaken his journey. It's indisputable that he lacks the depth that is present in all the other Straw Hats' characterizations, whereas what we need to see are more fighters who believe in the sword in the same way that Zoro does. Characters who represent different philosophies of swordsmanship, perhaps one who believes in swift, clean kills, or another who sees the sword as a spiritual extension of nature. These kinds of duels would elevate Zoro's story beyond just raw power progression. They would turn it into clash of ideologies, giving each fight more meaning, more emotional depth. We should have someone who is also aiming for Mihawk's title, someone who mirrors Zoro's ambition but has a different ideology or style. Again, a rival in the truest sense. That dynamic would not only push Zoro further, but allow the audience to see contrasting philosophies on what it means to be a swordsman. Do they rely on brute force, precision, honor, death duels? Without that sort of contrast, Zoro's path feels lonely and underdeveloped. When his opponents don't view their blade with the same significance as he does, that duel becomes one-sided in more ways than one. It turns what should be a classic shonen rivalry dynamic into just a solitary grind. Zoro's most meaningful fight so far against Mihawk at Baratie was a one-sided lesson. Since then, Zoro has mostly faced opponents who serve as temporary obstacles, but none that match him in both skill and narrative significance. None are chasing Mihawk like he is. No one has that same drive. Zoro's victories are all impressive, but from a pure swordsmanship standpoint, it can feel a little hollow in the context of his larger goal. He's cutting down warriors, but not peers. He's climbing a mountain that only he seems to believe exists, and only one man stands in the way. Which then leads me to another point. Why is no one else chasing Mihawk? Mihawk is the greatest swordsman in the world. That title should come with a long line of challenges. Rival swordsmen, bounty hunters, warlords aiming to dethrone him. But surprisingly, the story has shown us that no one else besides Zoro wants that spot, wants that title. This is bizarre, especially in a world that glorifies power and status. Why aren't there more swordsmen clamoring to test themselves against Mihawk? It's more than just a matter of screen time, it's a matter of narrative world building. Mihawk holds a position of global prestige. You would expect elite swordsmen from all over the seas trying to defeat him to claim the title for themselves. Instead, Mihawk is portrayed as this untouchable mountain with only one climber, Zoro. And this lack of competition reduces the weight of the title. If no one else wants it, is it really that important? Why should Zoro's ambition to surpass Mihawk feel so meaningful if the world around him doesn't seem to care? It makes his journey feel detached from the rest of the world's power structure. Compare that to the title of Pirate King. The biggest names in history are all chasing that. There's a sense of urgency, a race, even with Whitebeard's former title as the world's strongest man. We did see a number of characters trying to size themselves up against Whitebeard, recognizing that title for all that it stands for. Whereas for Mihawk, nothing. Meaning that Zoro's journey lacks that same energy. Whereas if Oda had introduced more swordsmen chasing the title, it would make Mihawk's position feel earned and not assumed. It would also give Zoro a much more compelling battlefield, something to prove himself amongst others, not just standing in the shadow of one man, because then Zoro would be proving himself as the best of the best. The payoff would be that much greater. I mean, come on, Zoro faces so little competition in that domain that the only person that could teach him to be a better, stronger swordsman was Mihawk himself. And then this leads to another world building issue within One Piece. This lack of other swordsmen makes it seem like Mihawk exists in a vacuum. We know that he's the current strongest swordsman, but we don't know anything else about the lineage of that title. Who held it before Mihawk? How did he claim it? Was there a great war amongst swordsmen, a duel that defined his supremacy? The absence of history makes the title feel invented for narrative convenience rather than being an organic part of the world's hierarchy. For all we know, he could have declared himself the strongest and no one just challenged him. Or, okay, maybe I need to calm down. Actually, I do myself discuss how Mihawk might have gotten that title, and I do recommend you check out this video afterwards. But seriously, why doesn't the world revere past swordsmen the way that it reveres past pirates like Roger or Rox? Surely there were legendary bladesmen before Mihawk, ones that inspired generations to come. Even Wano, which had so much promise and did delve into this idea of sword masters, legendary swordsmiths, even that fell short of what's truly needed to fully bake this idea of swordsmanship in One Piece. And that absence from the narrative makes the concept of the world's strongest swordsman seem almost shallow. Without a lineage or sense of historical progression, the title lacks gravity. Zoro's ambition is to surpass Mihawk, but surpassing a person is very different from surpassing a legacy. And what's missing is that generational narrative. Zoro should be chasing not just one man, but a tradition, a mythos, one that would elevate his journey from personal ambition to epic destiny. Otherwise, when you step back and take a look at the full picture, I can't help but feel you realize something. Swordsmanship in One Piece is undercooked. There are very few true swordsmen. Swordsmanship is only very vaguely defined. Zoro has no real rival. Mihawk exists in a vacuum. The title has no history. And when you put all of those together, it makes swordsmanship feel like a side concept. And I guess that's because in some ways it is. At the end of the day, Zoro is only one of our cast of protagonists, and he's not our main character. And while, again, One Piece does qualify as a battle manga, as I keep saying, it's so much more than that. The fighting is only one aspect of Oda's storytelling, which goes much deeper than punch punch, kick kick, and again, don't get me wrong, I love that about One Piece, and I'm sure you do too. But even still, when you have a character like Zoro who is as significant as he is, being Luffy's very first crewmate, his right-hand man, and when swordsmanship is as central to his character as it is, then I feel like this is definitely deserving of more focus. Because at first glance, the issue of the lack of swordsmen in One Piece might seem minor, but when you look at it deeper, it's clear that this is a narrative blind spot that weakens a central pillar of the story. Zoro's arc, which should be one of the most emotionally and thematically rich journeys as a core protagonist of the series, is undercut by the fact that swordsmanship lacks the necessary depth. Whereas fixing this wouldn't require a massive rewrite, just introduce some more rival swordsmen, flesh out the legacy behind Mihawk, give us glimpses into the once great swordsman era, show us the world's respect for swordsmanship in the same way that we see reverence for Haki and devil fruits. Those small tweaks could make a massive difference. Make this masterpiece of a series even even greater. In my opinion, at least. But you know what? Let me know what you think. Am I alone in thinking that swordsmanship should be developed further in the story? Or do you think there should be more to it as well? Let me know by leaving a comment below. If you enjoyed today's discussion, make sure to like and share the video. Please do subscribe and become a part of the JoyFleet's first 100,000 subscribers. And you can also help support the channel further like these wonderful people by becoming a Patreon or channel member. But as always, thank you for listening to another one of my One Piece ramblings. This is JoyGirl, and I'll see you again soon.